Wherever you are, there's probably something you can do to go out there and meet people. Even if you're sitting in the middle of nowhere, there's probably got to be some city or urban area, an hour, 2 hours away from you, where there's a local meetup, or maybe you need to get a cheap plane ticket and hop on a plane and go to San Francisco or go to New York or go to Boston or go to some place where you can meet people, because that's going to give what I found an outsized result, like an outsized return based upon the effort.
Hello and welcome to the Jumpstart podcast with Jeffalytics. I'm your host, Jeff Sauer. Today, for our 39th episode, we're going to talk with Dan Shure, owner of Evolving SEO and a MAZ Associate. Now, I've seen Dan's name around the SEO world for years, but this is actually our first time talking with each other. We were introduced through Fred Pike, who is a friend of Jeffalytics, and he thought we would have a lot in common. Now, I'm going to save you the suspense here, and I'm going to say that we actually really do have a lot in common. We both recorded this podcast in sweltering offices. Now, Dan's was to counteract the cold outside, and mine was to keep out the noise from the Thai countryside. We recorded it on a Friday evening my time, which was Friday morning on the East Coast of the United States. Now, one of the areas where we're different is that Dan started out as a musician and also made some money on the side by making websites. He had to balance these two things for several years as he went into his career. Fast forward a few pivots later, and Dan turned into an SEO champion. And now I'm being intentionally vague because I don't want to give away Dan's story. I'd rather have Dan tell it to you himself. But what I can tell you is that I walked away impressed. From a struggling musician making ends meet to a successful SEO practice, Dan has had to hustle every step of the way. But this interview is more than just a journey. It's action-packed with ideas for how you can improve your own prospects by listening to the marketplace. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you'll probably note the cool synergies that we've seen between musicians and marketers. Michael King talked about this in his Jumpstart episode, where he said that every time that he writes something, every time that he does work in marketing, he thinks about it like a song. And Marty Weintraub did this as well in his interview. It makes me wish that I actually had some musical talent myself. But I don't. I have no musical talent. So I'm going to have to leave the music to the professionals and just stick to my role as a podcast host extraordinaire. So let's listen to Dan Shure and learn about how a piano teacher became an SEO. Visit jeffalytics.com/Shure for show notes. Okay, so we're here today with Dan Shure. Dan, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Jeff, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great. I'm really excited to hear about your journey. And, like we always do in the podcast, I just want to start off by asking you, what made you decide that you wanted to get into SEO? Was it a project? Was it something you were working on? What made you decide this is the right career path for you?
Great question. In about 2007, 2008, I had just been married. We were poor. We had no money. I was trying to do things to make some extra income. So I had always built kind of websites on the side. But at that time, I was working for my dad. I was teaching piano lessons, and I was helping a friend with his piano tuner's website. So it was like this convolution of things that kind of all collided and happened at once. So I was making these websites for people, and everyone was asking, including myself, who was trying to get students in the door for my piano lesson business. We were all wondering how to get search traffic. So I just started learning about it, and I was just incorporating SEO into the projects that I was already working on, the website projects. And I was sitting in my car one day listening to the SEO 101 podcast. I'm sure you've heard about that podcast, Jeff. And it hit me that that John and Ross on that show, they do SEO full time. Like up until that point, I just assumed SEO was this thing that you just kind of put into websites if you were a designer or developer. It wasn't this separate career. And when it hit me that that's all they did, kind of a light bulb went off, and I said, oh, okay, that's the part I want to do, because I was always trying to arrive at the SEO, at the marketing, at the analytics, at that stuff. That was always the part that was most exciting for me. So when that light bulb moment went off, I realized that I wanted to make the switch to move to doing SEO full-time.
Yeah, interesting. So yeah, you're sitting there and learning about it, thinking maybe it's a one-time thing, or you just do it and then it's done, and then suddenly you're like, oh, people are getting paid for this.
Exactly.
At that time, then, obviously you're getting paid to do it as a freelancer. Were there jobs available, or what do you do next once you learn that it's something that's viable?
Yeah, it's funny. So I did what I always did, which was way back when I was, and I've got other stories further back in my past that led up to this, if that's at all interesting. But I did what I always did, which was just kind of offer to do work for free and try to do spec work until I could get paid for it. So because I was in the piano teachers kind of world out there online, I had been networking with people in forums, trying to learn about how to run your piano studio. I went into pianoworld.com, and I believe how it happened was I either posted a message saying, hey, I've been doing SEO. I'm willing to do it on somebody's piano studio for free in exchange for some case studies or testimonials, or somebody actually posted they were looking for SEO help. Either way, it kind of worked out that there was this piano school in Michigan that did need SEO help. I helped them. I might have gotten paid a couple $100 or did it for free. I don't really remember now. But they saw so much success from it that it developed some great case studies. I did maybe one or two of those things in a period of about 3 to 6 months, and that really kind of helped get the traction going to be doing only SEO. Because up until that point, as I mentioned, I was just kind of randomly building websites for people. And I was a very hacky developer and not really a designer at all. I'm colorblind, so that doesn't really help the whole design thing. Even though my dad's a professional sculptor, I have no artistic kind of thing in me for that. So that's really how it started, was just trying to do some, small projects for free, get some testimonials, and then really from there, being able to go out online into Twitter, into SEO MAZ at the time, into SEO Book, and network with people online was really the next kind of gateway into being able to do SEO full time, because that, and we can get into the details, but that kind of naturally led to jobs, referrals, blogging, and all that kind of stuff, which is, I'm sure leads to, opens a lot of doors to clients and so forth.
Yeah, the personal brand piece, it's everything. Yeah, I definitely want to get into that, but actually, you had mentioned doing things before. That's actually was something I was curious about, is, being sort of a web developer, and even, as you said, a hacky one who's just putting together, websites for people. How long were you doing that for before you discovered SEO? Was that what you considered to be your career? How did you get trained to do web development, or is it just actually it's funny that you mentioned that it's for your family business that you were starting out. That's actually how I got started making websites as well. My dad was like, hey, can you make a website for my business? And that was actually my first intro to doing this stuff. So curious about how you got started.
Yeah, I'm going to back all the way up to about high school, 17, 18. Okay. And I've slowly realized throughout the years that, I always thought I was just somebody that shouldn't have a job. I always thought I was just a terrible employee, and that's why I was just working for myself and having these businesses. But, if you really want to get down to labels, I was always kind of entrepreneurial in certain regards. My dad's a business owner. My uncle's a business owner. Actually, two of my uncles are business owners. So it kind of is in the family. And I always wanted to be a musician, right? So I went to music school. I skipped physics class in high school every day to go down to the music department and compose music. So that was kind of my career and trajectory. But in high school, a couple friends of mine discovered Blue Man Group, which is this group of men painted in blue, drumming on buckets. And we loved that so much, we wanted to emulate them. So we just very organically and randomly kind of assembled this little group of us, 3 people. We were bucket drummers, essentially. And one thing led to another, and we did a performance at my old elementary school, in front of 4th and 5th graders. It was an hour performance. We taught them, the merits of recycling by how we were drumming on buckets and, yada, yada. And the punchline of the story right here is that at that time, I had what I thought was just this random idea to make postcards and mail them, with stamps, to 500 schools in the area. And what I later learned you would call, a mail campaign, direct mail campaign. Yeah. But no one had told me what that was, but we just went ahead and did that. So we designed 500 postcards, we had them printed, we stamped them. That led to us not having to work at McDonald's, for summers while we were on school break, but we got paid to go to elementary schools and summer camps and libraries and all this stuff to drum on buckets in front of kids for an hour. So who knew? And it was tons of fun. It was a much better way to, make a little bit of extra cash on school breaks. And, the point of that story is just that that's the antithesis really of having a job, right? That's just wanting to do something fun and creative with your friends. And that's how I looked at it at that time. I didn't really even know what the word entrepreneur was. But, fast forward, I went to music school. I have one of the most worthless degrees ever in classical piano performance. I don't know what that degree would get me, except, maybe teaching the piano lessons I did. But after I graduated, then I really wanted to be a performing musician. So taking the same principles, I would dub cassette tapes. If anybody remembers what those are, I would make copies of those and drive around to all the local restaurants trying to get a gig playing at cocktail hour and so forth. So all of these activities really, gave me kind of the mindset and the skill set to be able to kind of get out there, market yourself, showcase yourself, as you said, build a personal brand and all that stuff. And I think being a musician or any kind of performer where you really have to just kind of put in a lot of work, a lot of elbow grease to get the gig, to get the performance, to make that happen, that really gives you the stomach that you need in a lot of ways to be a business owner or an entrepreneur or whatever word you want to call it.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to hustle, right, in order to get anybody to listen. And it's actually probably much more difficult to do it with music than it is with online, right? Because you're so focused on your local area and reaching people, and there's so much, it's so physically demanding to get your name out there that it seems like, if you can learn that and master it in the offline world, the online starts to go right from there.
Well, I tell you, the pay is much worse being a musician.
Yeah, well, I can imagine. We've had a few musicians on the podcast, and it's interesting that how the skills that you learn being a musician aren't similar to what you have to learn to run a successful online marketing business. But they also make you confident. They make you be able to structure. They teach you structure. They teach you how to complete work. So a lot of really cool things come out of being a musician that affect an online marketing career. So I was just wondering if you had the same thoughts, if you had anything to share around that piece.
I would agree. I think the one thing, if there are any musicians listening, or the one thing I wish I learned as a musician is that when you're trying to perform and get your art out there, you'll almost bend over backwards and try to do anything to can I play my music for you? It's you don't, at least I didn't necessarily develop that skill of confidently asking to be compensated what our value is, right? Of really knowing your monetary value. And so that was one of the things that's been tricky transitioning to doing online marketing because, as I mentioned, the pay as a musician is so much lower than doing online marketing. But the skill that I've been trying to develop even still is that confidence to kind of say, this is my price, this is what we charge. Because as a musician, you can walk into a club and hand somebody your tape, and if they like it, but they're like, well, you can get, 50% of the cover after we make our minimum type of thing. And you're like, okay, because you're just dying to play in front of people. That part of it's really the only element I found that didn't develop kind of that astute business knowledge. But I agree about the rest of it. Having to, go around and knock on doors and stay up till 2 a.m. Just to work. Those elements of really grinding away really do help carry into the business world. Yeah,
and I'm guessing it helps you appreciate the business world even more, just how the opportunities it affords. Because like you said, minimum amount of things, getting paid a percentage of covers and everything like that. There's only so much money to go around in that performance and in that club where you might perform a gig. Versus online when we're talking about growing businesses and we're talking about helping them make money, and it's not a trivial amount of money. We're talking about potential for companies to make millions of dollars based on our knowledge. Then I think that you can have a better argument to say, hey, we should get paid more, or we're worth more, right? Because the value is easier to define. I mean, it's not even so much easier to define. It's just that there's more opportunity to create value out there.
Yeah, one quick little anecdote just to really paint the picture of like how desperate musicians are. So at the time, my roommate was actually the drummer in a couple bands that I played with. We were willing to play a gig in Vermont. So just for context, we were in Seacoast, New Hampshire. Burlington, Vermont is like a 4-hour drive anyways. But in a blizzard, literally a blizzard, we drove to Burlington, Vermont. It took us probably 5.5 hours in his old Honda Civic just to go play a gig, and we maybe made $30. And we got there, and he had forgotten his cymbals. So we were walking around in a blizzard in Burlington, Vermont, knocking on the doors of other clubs to see if there were any drummers that had cymbals we could borrow.
Wow.
So these are the kinds of stories. But a little business anecdote, just to tie a bow on that story, is that we were doing a gig, and one thing that I realized that you never know who's going to be there. And this is similar to business too. You never know who you're going to be working for a client, and then they bring in a PPC company that could refer you people. Like, you never know who's going to see your work. And we wrapped up this gig at a little tiny club in Burlington, Vermont, and I played my heart out. You know, we had just drove 5 hours in the blizzard, so I really wanted to, like, put my all into it. And we were packing up, and this guy walks up to me very sort of, like, mysteriously. And he just gives me a look, and he hands me a business card. And on it, it said in big letters, Keyboard Magazine. And if anyone's aware, like at that time, like magazines were actually like something people thought were important and they read. This was probably like 2003. And he's like, I reviewed that keyboard you're playing. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And he handed me his business card, and that was kind of the last I heard of him. I think I maybe tried to follow up, but you know, that was a lesson in like not being as persistent with like following up with people, because it could have led to a cool connection and yada yada. But that's sort of like the serendipitous things I think that happen in the business world as well. Is you'll be at a conference, you'll meet somebody sitting next to you, and you realize that, you know, they're like the top person at some huge company or something like that.
I mean, that's exactly how it goes, right? Like if you think about it, playing a gig and even getting paid $30 versus going and presenting at an SMX conference or a conference in the industry, a lot of times you have to pay your own way to get there. You have to pay for a hotel. You're paying, you know, quite a bit of money, probably over $1,000 to do a speaking gig at a lot of these conferences, all in the hope that somebody in the audience wants to use your agency to perform what you were talking about, or you might find a connection that's in there. So we do a lot. I mean, it's funny when you think about it that way, but a lot of us still have to do things that, you know, for free, basically. Like you said earlier, you do things to get the experience. You do things in order to elevate your profile so you don't have to do it anymore. But it's like everybody starts that way, and it seems like it crosses multiple industries as well.
Absolutely.
Great. So you're playing, you're a musician, you have a web background, and then you get into, you know, doing SEO specifically. You're getting your case studies, you're hustling. How do you turn this into a business then, from just a hobby doing things for free? How do you turn it into your business, and then how do you evolve from there?
It's a great question. I don't know if I would have done it this way if I were to have done it over again, but it happened very slowly, almost painfully slowly. So if you can picture, like, I don't know, some kind of chart or something that shows the progress over like a period of years, like let's say 2008, I was 20% SEO and website stuff and like 80% teaching piano lessons and working at my dad's business. And then like the next year would be like 70% and 30, and then like 60 and 40. So it was like this slow, gradual transition for like a period of 3 years. I was still, or a couple years, I was still teaching music lessons 3 days a week and doing SEO. And then I went to like 1 day a week teaching. And then finally I went to none, and I stopped working with my dad. So it was this very gradual transition where I was like, kind of depending upon the consistent paycheck through the other things I was doing, while kind of like doing the SEO on the side. But I wouldn't call it this, like, you know, people have like a quote side hustle, like, and all that kind of thing. Like, I wouldn't call it like that. Like, all of this stuff made up the 100% pie of my full-time income. So it wasn't like a side hustle thing per se, but it was really just kind of like doing 3 things all at once until I could finally phase out the others and do SEO full time. But if I were to do it again, I probably would have tried to just get more aggressive and double down on getting SEO clients a lot faster. Because I normally, and even to this day, I need to get better with this, but I tend to just kind of let the ones come in the door that come knocking versus going out there and like, directly trying to approach people or cold emailing people and things like that. Like that's not always been my approach to getting SEO clients. But if I had to do it over again, I might have tried to be a little more aggressive about making that switch quicker. Because I don't know if your listeners have been there. It's painful, right? During that like transition process, especially if it drags on 2-3 years, because you feel like you're just kind of hanging in this, like, you don't know when you're going to get there, if you're going to get there. And it just leaves a lot of things unsettled until that's resolved.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny, I'm actually talking in my course about running an agency. Basically, I defined it as like the dreamer phase, the freelancer, and then the agency phase. Like there's several different phases you go through. But I think, I mean, you say you'd want to do it faster. I only did 6 months before I jumped in. Very similar background to you. And once I jumped in, I was so, I just had so much business to work about, just aspects of running a business, that I wish that I would have been wiser about the choices I made. Because once you jump into it, it's really hard to look back or to look at it objectively. And so it's funny, like I wish that I would have waited longer, and you're saying do it sooner. So I think it's somewhere in between, right? But I think that the key is to project what this business is going to be as much as you can, because once it's like everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? That famous quote. That's really how it is running a business. And so I don't know if it's 3 years, I don't know if 8 years is the right time, if not even thinking about it is the right time. It's sort of funny however you look at it, that's really what it's like running a business, is that there's never really a perfect time. And once you do it, you might, you wish you would have done things differently, but that's the luxury you have of hindsight.
Yeah, and I think it's the context too. For me, like I never really loved teaching music lessons. I always just did it because I wanted to be a musician, and that's a great way to supplement being a performing musician. And so that was kind of like this leftover thing, because I wasn't performing music anymore at that point. So the performance kind of gave me the energy and the excitement to go then teach 4 hours of little kids, So, but when I was doing SEO and music, aside from monetary things, it was really like I really just wanted to be doing the SEO stuff full time. And I think that's where the tension and the friction came from. Because, I would be sitting there doing my SEO work, and then I'd have to close my laptop and basically what was in my mind, babysit a bunch of little kids for 4 hours. So it wasn't like the most exciting, I felt like I was finally getting into the adult world, which is SEO, business, websites. But then I was kind of still stuck in this school kid teaching kind of world. And that was a very, weird contrast for a little while.
Oh, for sure. I hear exactly what you're saying. And I think that I'm guessing that's for now, or even once you get your business going, that doesn't go away. It's just you get easier at dealing with it because you feel more in control of the direction you take. Because I know that sometimes there's things that I don't want to do that I just still have to do because that's part of running a business.
Yeah. Fortunately, and I do have to give a shout out to my wife, Sarah, who I would not be running this business without her. So she's actually a big piece of the story that I didn't cover yet, which is parallel to me teaching and working for my dad and all this stuff. She went back to business school and got her bachelor's degree in business with the intention of coming back and helping me in this business here. And when she kind of took over the business and the finance side of things around 2011, 2012, it was almost like she arrived and she was like, what did you do? Because my QuickBooks it was a mess. I had set things up incorrectly or sloppily, because, you could obviously tell it wasn't what I was really excited about. Mm-hmm. But to your point, I definitely wouldn't be doing this without her help and her, work and effort. And she handles all the taxes and all the law stuff. So all that stuff that is a bit of a drag, I'm very fortunate to have her helping out with that.
Awesome. That's great. I mean, that's really what we all need, is to surround ourselves with people who can handle the things that we're not good at or don't want to do, right? It's not so much not good at it. It's don't prioritize it.
I'll be honest and say for me, I'm terrible at it.
Yeah.
It's both. I'm not good, and I don't want to do it.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I actually, everything you're saying, I'm like, man, I should just, I could say me too, but I don't think that we really want to, this is all about you, right? But this is really the things that people go through in running a business and in getting their name out there and in deciding how they're going to go. And so you're basically building this business up. You're doing you said 80-20, then you're doing 70-30, and then you're sort of easing it down. And then after 3 years, you're like, hey, it's time. I'm going to do this. And you went and started just picking up clients and working with them full time.
Yeah, it just, part of making the switch was when I felt a degree of comfort by the amount of leads that were coming in and the amount of steady work we had for SEO to call it quits. And, I did it, like I said, very slowly. So there was a whole year where I was still teaching music lessons one day a week just to have that little feeling of comfort, because that for 10 years, that had been sort of my feeling of security and stability when it came to finances, was teaching those regular music lessons, because at least it was a guaranteed paycheck.
Yep.
But when, there were a period of things that happened when I was making the switch full time that I think the listeners might be able to take some stuff away from if they're starting out or they're wondering how to take the next step or how to build their business. I can't overemphasize enough the importance of in-person networking and meeting people. In 2011 or so, I drove 7 hours round trip to New York City probably 3 or 4 times to go meet the people down at Distilled, at the agency Distilled. They were having some local meetups there. A couple of clients even came from that. But better yet was just, I met people at that time that became very key referral sources or people to kind of know at the time, like John Doherty, who's a guy who worked with Distilled and then went on to Zillow, and now he's on his own. He's got Get Credo as his website. I met him. I met Ron, who was doing sales at Distilled, Tom Critchlow, who was very well known in the SEO industry for a while. All of these people kind of became the early relationships, and I just looked at it as friendships, right? Like I wasn't trying to, get something from somebody else or do the quote networking. Like I just saw these people as interesting, and I was curious and wanted to meet them. Essentially, is what it was, and make friends. That's what I thought it was. It was kind of like I associated with when I used to want to meet a musician that I liked how they played or something. Like I just wanted to engage with them. So driving to New York, and then I would go to local events here in Mass. I'm only 30 minutes down the street from Stone Temple Consulting, where Eric Engie and all those people, where their offices are. So I went to a few speaking things that Eric did. I'm not far from Boston, so I was able to go to a lot of Boston meetups. Constant Contact had some events. So wherever you are, there's probably something you can do to go out there and meet people. Even if you're sitting in the middle of nowhere, there's probably got to be some city or urban area, an hour or 2 hours away from you, where there's a local meetup, or maybe you need to get a cheap plane ticket and hop on a plane and go to San Francisco or go to New York or go to Boston or go to some place where you can meet people, because that's going to give what I found an outsized result, like an outsized return based upon the effort. We can sit here on the internet and talk all we want or tweet with people, but nothing replaces that meeting that person in person in real life. So I did a ton of that in 2011. I got to go to MozCon in 2012. I had become a MAZ Associate in early 2012, so was fortunate enough to have a free ticket to go out there. Not a plane ticket, but a ticket to the event. So a lot of it was in-person networking coupled with, though, and I think this is where some people have a disconnect. You have to couple it with the online networking, because the only reason I was able to actually sit at a dinner table with, Mike King from iPullRank and Tom Critchlow and all these people. This is another funny story, actually. So I was down at Affiliate Summit East because I won a ticket because I was obsessively glued to my Twitter timeline, 24/7, to try to notice opportunities. So they were giving away a free ticket to Affiliate Summit East 2011, and I had never been to a real conference before. I think I just had to tweet at them or something to get a free ticket. I forget what it was, but I won the free ticket. I hopped on one of those cheap $10 buses from Boston to get to New York. I'm not making this up. I had a bag of boiled eggs with me, and a bag of stale cookies that I got from my father-in-law. Because at that time in 2011, we were still like literally going on like pennies. So I was just bringing food with me to like have food and like make sure that I, had something to eat on the train and so forth. I get there. I walked from Penn Station all the way to the Upper East Side to get to my sister's apartment where I slept on the floor, to walk across town three days in a row to get to the conference. Anyways, I found myself eating dinner just randomly with like Tom Critchlow, Mike King, John Doherty, like all these people that I had admired from afar online doing great things in SEO. I think Rhea Drysdale was there. And that only happened because I was kind of engaging in networking with them first on Twitter, like ahead of time.
Yep.
And it was John that was the one that sort of said, okay, you can come along and meet us. But I showed up there and like, I could see the expression on everyone else's face. They were like, who is this guy? I just walk up to their dinner table essentially and sit myself down like, here I am, and no one knew really who I was necessarily except for John at that time.
Yep.
But the point there is, if people listening are looking for ways to kind of connect the dots, you have to couple the online marketing with the offline marketing. That means knowing if you're going to be going to an event, engaging or networking with the people that are going to be at that event ahead of time, or following the hashtag ahead of time, or talking about that you're going to the event ahead of time, or writing a blog post about the event ahead of time. So when you get there, you've done some of this pre-networking. It's a little bit more of a warmer introduction to meet people.
Well, it's especially important for introverts or people who maybe aren't somebody who would just randomly go up to people and talk to them and ask them how they're doing. It's easier if you can use Twitter to say, hey, I'm going to be there. Let's meet up, or let's form a connection. I've actually had that happen several times at conferences where either friends or other people knew that I was going to a conference and they either told me to look somebody up and I would do that, or they would make an introduction and we would meet up with people. And a lot of times it turned into business, but at the very least it turned into friendships. A lot of people who are on my podcast I've met in person, and we talk and I'm like, hey, you should come on the podcast. And so it's a lot easier to do an invite when you say, hey, we've talked, let's have this happen, as opposed to reaching out of the blue, right? So basically, you're right. Everything you do online is amplified. It's better with a physical connection on top of it. Doing an offline connection for sure.
And there's a really interesting psychological trigger, and I do want to give a couple actionable tips for the listeners. Although, as you can probably tell, I don't mind talking about myself. But a little, like I'll dig up the name for you, Jeff, so you can put it in the show notes. But sure. I saw a TED Talk where somebody was talking about if you have this gut feeling or like just this thought or like an idea occurs to you, if you don't act on it within the first 5 seconds, you're going to start second guessing yourself, and then you might not even do it. And so what I realized was, and I've only been getting, I'm good at this sometimes, but if that voice in the back of your head comes in and tries to censor you or stop you from doing something, that happens to everybody. So I'm trying to get better at that. But what I've realized is when I have sort of a gut reaction or feeling to something, or like an idea or an excitement, like I just try to act on that very quickly, because then otherwise I will censor myself. And a few direct, tangible things have led to doing this. So Brian Dean, who is backlinko.com, I'm sure a lot of people know him. We had left each other a couple random messages here and there online, like over the years. Like before he was like really well known in the SEO world, he was actually commenting on like my YouTube videos and stuff like that. And then he got really popular. I forget what happened. He either put out a post or a video or something one day, and I just had this like, it's almost like a physical feeling. And Mark Johnson, who was on my podcast recently, talked about this when looking for stories to cover, like journalistically, or like if you're looking for something like a content idea for a client, like pay attention to these small little like physical feelings you might have in your body that can guide you. I know it sounds like, kind of woo-woo, but it's actually something that's had results. So I've done this multiple times where I had this like, just this gut feeling that I wanted to just like email Brian directly and say, hey, I really like what you've been doing. We should Skype, we should connect, we should talk. And I did that, and we scheduled a Skype for a couple weeks later, and then it turns out he's from Rhode Island, and I'm up in Massachusetts, and he was home for the holidays a month after that, and we got to meet in person, and we've gotten to meet in person a few times since then. But the direct things that's led to is over the period of 6 to 8 months or a year or whatever it is, he's referred a couple clients my way. He's actually connected me with a bunch of people that have been on my podcast, and I didn't set out to connect with him or anybody else like that to like get something. It was just this like reaction where I really like what he's doing. I admire his work, and I just kind of wanted to connect on that level.
Yeah.
And I did that also recently with Glenn at Viper Chill. If anybody has checked out viperchill.com, It's really interesting. He tells great stories. He's sort of doing his own thing, which is really cool, like in affiliate marketing and like getting into niches and that kind of stuff. But I did the same thing with him the other day, and then a couple days later, he sent a referral to me, and I totally did not expect that because I didn't know he would send referrals out to people. But I contacted him just with a very excited message saying, "Hey, I saw your post. I'm actually taking your post and putting what I saw in it into action because you've inspired me." Basically, as I wanted to thank him, and that led to him referring somebody to me, which I didn't expect. But it's these like. The tip and the punchline for listeners is to pay attention to those maybe internal like gut feels or like if you feel like a physical reaction and try to act on those without allowing too much time for you to stop yourself.
Yeah. And I would say be genuine too. I mean, if you appreciate somebody producing something, let them know. I mean, nobody really does that. You always hear about the negatives and the negative comments. It's like be positive with your interactions. And it's funny, what you just demonstrated is classic top of mind, right? This is something that I just taught in my course as well. And it's basically like the person, whenever somebody says, "Hey, do you know somebody who does SEO?" And if the person who doesn't, if the person who's asked doesn't do SEO, who do they think about that they can refer? Because you always want to refer somebody else in order to, not look like a jerk or not say, "Hey, I don't have anything for you." You always want to like give somebody a referral of some sort or somebody's name. It's always the person you talk to last, the person who's on the top of your mind, because you need to like, who are you gonna think of? The person who just emailed you and said, I'm applying your SEO technique right now and it's working? Or is it going to be somebody who you talked to 5 years ago? I mean, and I do the same thing. Like I always pass on a lot of referrals because I'm very focused in what I'm doing for consulting. So I pass on almost everything else. And it's almost always the person who I talk to last. And it's not always, it's usually more of a social thing than it is a business relationship thing. And that's that people don't always realize that. But even if you're calling on somebody socially, or if you're just saying, "Hey, let's go to lunch," it doesn't have to be an ulterior motive. Like it can just be talking to somebody and appreciating what they do in their position. But that is top of mind. And as much as the more you do that, the more you're going to get people passing you business. Absolutely.
Yep. I definitely agree. Jeff, do you have and by the way, for anybody listening, I'm going to be interviewing you on my show, so I have plenty of questions for you. But the one thing I find funny about this top of mind thing is if I'm doing it sort of in an artificial intellectual way, that's always felt weird to me. Whereas like the kind of just instinctual, "Hey, I'm just going to email this random person because this thing happened." Do you have any tips for trying to align that a little bit better, or maybe like move the practice of it a little bit more towards authenticity?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a fine line, right, between being authentic and being totally pushy. And so my general rule is it's at various levels. So if I've met somebody in person, then usually like at a conference, I make it a point to talk to them, and I just talk about whatever we talk about, no sales at all. And then maybe you become friends with them on Facebook, or you share with them in something, or you send an email and say, "Hey, I enjoyed what we talked about," or you and I both have the vehicle of a podcast, so you can invite somebody to be on your podcast. Not that not most listeners don't have podcasts, but it's like you have an excuse to do something. Or if you're going to be in the same city, let's meet up, or whatever it ends up being. Basically, it's top of mind does not have to be ulterior at all, because people can see through it. anybody who has a sales message. Like, for example, the classic, hey, you sound like an interesting person on LinkedIn. They connect with you, and then 2 seconds later, you get into something that doesn't even address you by name, and they have no idea. It's obvious that they have no idea who you are because they actually say like your company name, like, I've heard that Jeffalytics, I like what you're doing at Jeffalytics, and then they don't even say anything about it. That's the wrong way to do it. Or to reach out to somebody at random who you've never met and doesn't have a connection and you don't know who somebody is. And so I think the key is you got to like thread the needle. and it's basically like, if I received this email, would I delete it or would I be intrigued? That's sort of how I look at it. Even like for my podcast, I've had a 100% response rate with people that I've emailed about the podcast, which I can't even believe that's happened. But it's mostly because I'm just like,
I don't have that.
Well, and not, but I also, I think that it's more of like me afraid
very selective.
Being afraid of losing than anything. But that's because every time I write something, it's like podcast guest ? And then it's like super direct, like, hey, I've been researching you for 6 months, or I've been reading your blog for 3 years. I want to, let's talk about this. Or it's an introduction, like you and I were introduced, was it through Fred, I believe?
Fred, yep.
Yeah, Fred's awesome. He's one of my star students, and he was just mentioning it. And so that's how a lot of these things happen. But again, it's just top of mind in being there. And actually for you, like your podcast is another way. If somebody's listening to your podcast, then they might refer business to you. There's so many ways to put yourself out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. Great tips. I'll ask you about some more of those on my show.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the key is, as anything, is would you delete this if somebody sent it to you?
There's a great video Lewis Howes just put out. I'll send it to you so you can put it in your show notes. He just did a really fantastic video about, it's one of the most kind of detailed and actionable I've seen about how to network with like so-called influencers. Mm-hmm. I kind of hate that word, but people get what, people that are hard to reach essentially. So he gives some really good tips. I'll give it to you and you can share it with your listeners.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. Yeah, and I think that influencers, and actually this is probably a good transition just to get back onto the track of your career. I mean, connecting with influencers, I've talked to, I think, a few other people who were MAZ Associates on the podcast, but it seems like that might be, I don't know, I'm not sure what it means to be an associate, but like it seems like a catalyst or a way of showing that you've arrived in the industry. If you're, aligned with the 800-pound gorilla in SEO, or like the most well-known name, and you're helping them, you're giving back to the community. Does that elevate your profile? Does that open up doors for you? How has that affected what you've been able to do with your agency?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it does, and so does podcasting, by the way, and I'll get to that, and I'm sure you've experienced that. But the MAZ Associate thing, they've done a poor job because so many people are like, what the heck is a MAZ Associate? It's basically I work remotely, maybe 1 or 2 hours a week. I answer questions in the Q&A. I can write a post on the main blog at any point, so it doesn't have to go through like the UMAZ process. Mm-hmm. And, we get a free ticket to MozCon. I spoke at a Mozcation event like 3 or 4 years ago. So it's kind of like this association with the company that you're absolutely right. It gives people the impression that you've arrived in the industry, that you have a certain sort of maybe credibility. All of those factors are certainly really nice. I think that a label like being a MAZ associate and being a podcaster, the other thing I found is that when I'm reaching out to maybe Harrow replies, so press replies and things, that seems to make writers a little more secure or confident in selecting somebody with a MAZ associate label on random occasions too, I've had people tweet me and say like, well, Rand's following you, so I'm going to follow you, like that type of like weird association as well, and I think it just gives people in their impression a level of credibility that you might have. But for me, it's really more about like, I believe in Moz. I love their values, their tag fee values. I like the tool set. I'll be honest, I don't like all of the tools, and I've told them, and I've publicly said, I'm not crazy about like the site crawler, for example, but the new Keyword Explorer is incredible and amazing, and everyone should check it out. So it's really like not about just having the credibility for me, but I like them. You know, the people there I've worked with have all been so nice and giving and supportive and enthusiastic. So it's really, like you said, surround yourself with good people. That's part of why I'm doing that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious. I don't want to get too derailed, but has Harrow help a reporter out? Has that worked for you? Because I've gotten like a 0% success rate. So maybe I'm just doing it wrong.
Interesting. So we flipped the tables here. So you got the 100% podcast success rate.
Yeah.
And yeah, Harrow's definitely worked. I think there's some tricks to it. One is I'm getting really, really more selective about the questions that I choose to answer, meaning that I'm really trying to go really dead center on like the things I'm absolutely an expert at. I really know my stuff, not like giving opinions.
Yeah.
The other is speed in replying. I'm sure people have heard of this, but the faster you get a response and the more likely they are to see that. Mm-hmm. Also, what I've been doing is very, very clearly at the top. I've been playing around with this, but what I've been doing mostly is at the top, I'll put very clearly my name, my contact info, my website, like all my one-line bio, like that's at the very top. And I kind of put a heading in big capital letters like bio or about Dan or like whatever.
Yep.
And then below, you know, in big caps letters, so it grabs their eye, I put, you know, answer, like just super directly, like make it really easy for them to see what they want to see. Because a reporter, they want their answer. They want a quote they can cut and paste, or an answer they can cut and paste. And then they want their info. They don't want to follow up to ask for your Twitter handle or your website, or, you know, you try to give them everything all like in one package. So you don't, and the other thing is,
oh, so you don't even say, call me and I'll tell you the answer. You're just like, here's the answer. And then you hope that they quote, and then they quote you.
Yeah, like it's weird. You have to sort of intuit what they want based upon the query. But most people in Harrow seem like unless they directly say, tell me about yourself and we'll set up a call or something like that. Unless they kind of directly say, we're going to follow up with a call or an interview, they're probably looking for an answer or at least a demonstration that you can give them an answer. So even just a sample or a summary of what you might tell them. We 9 times out of 10 put the answer right in the reply.
Yeah. And then they just, do you even get a response from them, or sometimes they just publish an article and you're in it?
It's funny. So we don't always get a response. I responded to a Harrow, didn't hear back. A month later, the person who had submitted that Harrow wrote to me directly from her direct email address. And it turns out she was writing on American Express's blog.
Oh, cool.
And she's like, hey, I didn't use that reply, but can I ask you a different question? It was about like social media or something. And so I gave her a reply. It wasn't like a big feature. It was just a little roundup type of thing. But now I can say I'm in American Express, even though it's like a little, you know, sleazy to say it that way.
Yeah.
But those are the weird things that can happen. Like it's happened a few times where I've replied to a Harrow and the reporter just directly will email me with like another question or like another story like months later. But the last tip about the Harrow answer is that if you're going to take the time and, you know, for some context, a Harrow reply might take me 15, 20, 30 minutes, you know, but if it results in a link or a feature from a nice website, then that's fine with me. It's worth the 30 minutes. But the other thing is to really try to intuit what the actual question is, because a lot of times they'll be very cryptic in their inquiry. Is you're not quite sure what they're asking. So you really have to try to kind of pick apart, like, do they want like an anecdote? Do they want stats? Do they want like a story? Like, what are they looking for? And in the answer, I try to break it down and like have a lot of line breaks or put extra headings or like make it super obvious and clear and try to format it in a way that they can consume it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I love this. I love the podcast because I get like tips that I can actually use. Although I'm not, I have to figure out how I can actually use this to my advantage. But it's really fascinating that you were so successful, and it sounds pretty practical how you do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, we get maybe a handful of links and mentions, you know, throughout the year because we're replying to maybe like 20 of these or 30 of these across the year.
Yeah, okay, so it's not too time consuming for you to look through it then.
Right. Fortunately, Anthony here, who's our full-time employee, he looks through them every day and passes the ones along to me that are interesting.
Yep.
We do this for other clients too. So we've gotten our clients some really nice links as well and mentions by helping them with Haro.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, okay, so let's keep on going. Just because it's so this is super practical and actually it's very actionable, everything you've been talking about. But I don't want to miss out on. I don't want to have gaps in the whole process. So you start in 2010. You start full time with Evolving SEO, I assume, or maybe doing some teaching on the side, and then you've been doing it since this time. How long were you just a freelancer by yourself? How long until you started adding employees? How was that process for you? How have you felt about growth?
That's also been super slow as well. So that, I don't know if I would speed up. We're not very interested in having, a big business really bigger than 5 people. Mm-hmm. But so 2010 is when we officially bought the LLC and the domain name evolvingseo.com. It was available for $9, which was great. Funny, quick little anecdote about the name Evolving, by the way, because you probably know what names sometimes. I like your name, Jeffalytics. It's cool. It's catchy. I can understand it. But I've had some problems where I'm trying to when you're at a store and they want your email address to give you a receipt or something. Yeah. And I'm like, Dan at evolvingseo.com. They're like, what? Because nobody knows even what SEO is outside of our SEO bubble. So that's the one sort of hang up I have with the name. But the name came about because I was sitting down one day with a notebook and I was trying to come up with a name for my music lesson company. And I was like, what describes what I believe or who I am or anything like that? And I was just trying to, I realized that I always throughout the years would kind of my opinions would grow. They would change. They would evolve. And the word evolve hits me. And I'm like, oh, evolving music. So my music business was called Evolving Music Education because I was always trying to grow myself and encourage my students to grow as well. So then when I had to name my SEO company, I was like, I'll just keep evolving SEO. So that's where the name came up. And fortunately, the domain name was available. So 2010, we got the domain name. I taught lessons and did SEO parallel to one another until 2013, actually, which doesn't really even seem that long ago, but it was June of 2013 where I taught my very last piano lesson, and we also moved the official location and office of the business into the city of Worcester, Mass., second biggest city in New England, by the way. A lot of people don't know that. Since 2013 through September 2015, it was basically myself and my wife. In 2015, in September, we hired Anthony Penzabene, who is our full-time employee. He's been with us now since that time. Mm-hmm. And along the way, I've had another guy, Joe, who's a contractor, who's an all-star at Facebook advertising and data research. And he has a master's degree in business and marketing and stuff. So he's been kind of along for the ride as well within our team. So
nice. And so it's been a slow, steady growth, and client growth has been good as well. It sounds like you have a pretty good grip on getting in front of people, right? Whether it's through Twitter, you had mentioned that even back in the day, that was how you got in front of people, to help a reporter out, all kinds of different ways of generating business and getting the name out there. Has anything above others been more successful, or anything that you recommend that other people look into?
Yeah, if you're doing a service, people-based business like we are, where the currency is relationships and trust, then, like I said before, the in-person networking, or if not, the online networking, content is huge. Ironically, search engines are a terrible source of leads to sell SEO because it's people that they're not connected to anybody. They're not coming from a referral. They're tire kicking. They have a low budget. So it's really ironic. However, I will say that organic search traffic via content is a great referral source. If somebody discovers your content, then they kind of become your fan. They follow you for a little while, and 6-12 months later, they email you after they feel like they sort of have a relationship with you. I've had some great clients come about that way. Just nobody's sitting there typing in SEO consulting.
Well, and then when people do type that in there, tell me if you've heard this one before. Well, if you're so good at SEO, why don't you rank number one on Google for SEO consultant?
I've heard that many times.
I've gotten that one so many times, and I haven't done SEO in years.
Yeah. It's funny you also bring up, the client leads and things like that. I've noticed for sure, aside from my podcast, in the last year or two, I really took a step back from blogging, from doing like written content, and have done a select few speaking gigs here and there, but not a ton. But it definitely resulted in a little bit of a flatlining or atrophy of leads coming in the door. And so in 2017, and it's part of why I'm on your show and why I'm kind of doubling down on my show, and I've published more content this year than I did all of last year already. It's why I'm really kind of ramping that up again, because I've noticed that if you let up on that, you should expect or maybe prepare for a little bit less leads coming in the door, just because it's the top of mind thing too. It's not just direct top of mind, but it's if somebody hasn't seen me publish something on MAZ for over a year, I'm going to fall back in somebody's mindset. So that's part of it too. And I'm sure you experience this well with our industry, and especially with SEO. It's interesting. People will call and they'll say, we want SEO. And you're like, okay, that could be, in their mind, link building, rankings, content marketing, technical audits. Like, you don't really know what they want. And so there's always been a little bit of a challenge for myself and other SEOs. Like, what do I call the services that I'm offering? And I'm just going through a bit of a inflection point with this at the moment, because, I had been like saying to people for a while, like, well, we can do an ongoing campaign, or we can do a project, or I can consult for you, or like, but I found that people weren't getting it. They were still kind of saying, well, what are you going to do? Like, if you do a campaign, what are you going to do? And I had another one of those light bulb moments the other day where I was talking to Dmitry Dragolev. He was on my podcast. He does PR and stuff. And he got a gig doing content marketing. And essentially I was like, this is something that I'm doing. He got a really great gig for a big website that he called me in on to help him do this particular job. And I was like, Dmitry, how did you get this job? Like, what did you call what you do? Like, what were they looking for? And he laid it all out. He said, well, they came in wanting PR, but I told them, you don't want PR, you want content marketing. Even though he knew he was going to go back and basically do SEO, SEO-based content marketing, he still told them content marketing. Like, it's the term they know, they get it. There's an intuitive understanding of what that's going to be. And so now what I'm trying to go back and do is actually formulate the tangible, understandable, like, services that we do. Because it's a lot in SEO, right? Like, it's everything from rich snippet optimization to people asking me all the time for analytics help. Just because, I don't know, for some reason, when you do SEO, you're naturally the person that gets asked about analytics for some reason, because they see you as technical or good with numbers. So, but to your point, I mean, all of these factors have definitely come to a crossroads point right now where, I'm trying to better align and communicate the services we do and do really well in terms that the prospective clients can understand, while at the same time trying to get myself back out there again a little bit better in the industry. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's the hard part, because you can take many sales approaches. One is cast a wide net and then get as many leads as you can get, and then work the leads and tell them what they need, and either you provide it to them, or you can push them off to somebody else, or you just don't do that. Or you can basically be so tight with your services on your website that the only things that are coming in are the ones that are very focused. But the problem is that, like you said, it spans so many disciplines, and it's so many different areas that you could potentially do. And there's so many ways to talk about it that if you're too general, like if you say, I'm going to help you build your brand, it's not nearly tangible enough that somebody would bite off on that unless because you're competing with the gigantic agencies that are out there. So you can't be too general, because people want something specific. But if you're too focused, if you say, I only do link building, then it's hard to get any accountability for their results. And so it's hard to say this is going to give you the results. And so you have to,
Right.
again, you have to thread the needle between being specific and being around the tactic that you're going to use that you're good at, or the end result that you're going after. And it can't be too far in one direction or the other. And so
Yep.
it's hard. How do you describe these things other than saying I do SEO? That's the general thing that I do. And then it ends up being many components that I can provide to you, but we need to talk about that before I can provide it to you.
Yeah, even link building. What is link building? I mean, sure, it implies a result of like, we're going to get you links, but even there's the debate now, like, does that even matter? Does that even help? Like, what's really the end goal from that?
Yeah.
But even beyond that, it's like, well, what is link building? Is it outreach? Is it content-based? Is it, widgets? Is it scholarships? Like, what is that? So that's what we're trying to get better at, is actually telling people, because they want to know, like, what are you going to be doing?
Mm-hmm.
What's the actual activity? And it's funny because it does depend upon the inquiry too. And this is where you have to like kind of adjust, because some people just want to know, like, what's the goal you're going to have, or how many hours is it going to be, or, what's your strategy? Like, everyone kind of has a different way they're approaching it. So that's the challenge of it as well.
Yeah.
I'm definitely sometimes jealous of like other fields where it's like, well, I do Facebook ads.
Yeah.
Great. That's like super concrete. So, and I think every SEO or SEO agency kind of battles with this to some degree.
Yeah.
So
I would agree.
We're trying to get better at it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that the funny thing is that it's getting better at describing it on your website, but also getting a brand and having your brand be strong enough that people want to work with you. Because when they want to work with you, all the questions sort of go away. And it's just like, how do I work with Dan? How do I work with Evolving SEO? So that it's like there's the short-term things you can do to sort of put filters on on the inquiries. But then the long-term solution is simply to have a brand that demands a high margin so you can do what you're best at.
Yeah, I mean, Will Reynolds, RCS. I don't know if you've heard of like his like real company stuff.
Yeah, I was at that MAZCon. I heard him do that one. That was great.
Yeah, was that 2012? I
think it was 12. It was either 11 or 12.
Yep. Yeah, I was at that one as well. That was the only MozCon I've been to. But yeah, he's done such a fantastic job at that. If you want the real company stuff that does, real creative and business and, real marketing based SEO, you go to Will.
Yeah. That's a good position to be in, because I mean, that's very strategic with how he did it too. And it seems like they've taken off ever since then. So that's...
Yeah, it was funny. I've had the chance to sit down and talk to Will a few times, and he told me that there was no strategy behind that. Again, it goes back to like, he just had this gut sort of like, it almost came to him on a whim, the whole RCS thing, but it turned into this brand. So it's kind of interesting how that can kind of happen just organically.
Yeah. Well, that's how everything happens. People don't realize that every entrepreneur, everything is like just putting something out there, right? Like, you can't have a perfect plan. You have to just put something out there and see what people react to. And then the key is, once people do react and there are people who are interested in it, to continue on that path, or to continue to give them what they want.
That's such a good point. I mean, I'm sure your listeners have felt paralyzed about putting out a tweet or a piece of content or something into the world, because they're, and I've done this where I'm trying to calculate, like, is this going to go viral, or are people going to like this? But one of the reasons that one way I got myself to start publishing more this year was just to say, hey, everything I publish is an experiment, and I'm just putting it in the market to see what happens. And I love that advice that you gave there, to put stuff out there, and then how people react to it is then that's going to tell you your next step, or if it's a crappy idea and you just abandon it.
Yeah, exactly. Or it was just not at the right time. The timing is a big X factor in this whole thing. Is like, where does it fit on the timeline? Like, doing things, it was easier to get traction 5 years ago, I would say, on something, because there were fewer people publishing content, but also you might not be able to get it going nearly as fast. And so that, it's a combination of both as it comes into it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's great to hear your story, and actually it's funny that you said evolving and like how it's always evolving. It's sort of like how I'm picturing it in my mind too. It's like an evolution of an entrepreneur and turning it into a business. So sort of fitting that you chose that as your company names, both of them.
Yeah.
And so
I wrote one of, like, my first article. It's still on my blog. It's terrible, I don't mean to cut you off there, but I love hip hop music, and I have this parallel in my mind. I don't know if I've just made it up or if it's just me trying to like be clever, but to me, hip hop music's always kind of evolving as well, because it's a style of music that's not tied to a musical element. Like jazz is tied to like a structure and a certain harmony and a certain like format or a tempo, and like hip hop isn't, because hip hop takes samples and recreates that into something else. And I always saw hip hop as like musically, if you were to like pick apart the musical elements of something that's always kind of growing. And so, I don't know, it's just a neat little thing that I carry through my mind as well, that I do like things that feel alive and that feel like they're kind of growing.
Love it. I think it's perfect. So I just have one last question. We've gone through a lot. I wish actually there's even more. I think there's a lot more to ask you, but we're running out of time. So last question is just if you know, and you've given some advice already to people who are, you know, maybe on the sideline looking to make a leap, looking to go into something, but anything you can say for somebody who's looking to grow their career in marketing, SEO, analytics, anything in the digital space, any recommendations for them?
Yeah, I would say weirdly conflicting things. One, follow people's advice, but two, ignore people and don't follow their advice. And what I mean by that, and as I learned this when I was doing my podcasts, I would go around asking all the big podcasters, like Cliff Ravenscraft, right? I got to meet him at Podcast Movement. I asked him for tips. I was playing around on Anchor, on the Anchor app last year, the spoken audio app. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a Twitter for audio. I met a bunch of random podcasters. Anyways, the point being is I would go around and I'd say, what makes a great show? What should I do to get people listening and want to join in on the next show? And I remember people giving all these tips. Well, you gotta tease your next episode at the end of the prior episodes. You need them all lined up, and you need to have it all, you know. And people would say, well, you need this microphone, or you need that microphone. And I would listen to all that, and I'd say, okay, I get where they're coming from. Like, they've done this stuff. It's worked for them.
Yep.
Something they've learned. They're trying to help and share their knowledge, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, I would try all of it, but realize that, like, ultimately, I really want to do things my own way. And I think you need that sort of polar opposite two-track mind where, like, you're going to try to take in what the advice other people give you. And this applies to business. Like, if somebody's telling you, you know, you need to set up an LLC, you should probably listen to that. Like, but if somebody's telling you, well, to get leads, you have to do things this one way, like, you could try it, but I always recommend that people have a parallel track where they're trying to experiment and do things their own way and pave their own path. And I think that, you know, if somebody's sitting there and they want a stable, secure, you know, business where they're providing a good service to people, sure, there's like these tried and true things that really matter and that you can put into the business that you're doing. But if you're maybe trying to innovate or do something a little bit different or a little bit special, or maybe like for me, I just really want to feel like I'm being authentic. And sometimes that's hard in a day and age where there's Twitter and there's noise and there's blogs and there's podcasts even, and there's all this stuff coming. So I think it's that parallel thing where you have to try to absorb other people's advice, but at the same time try to stay authentic and try to do experimenting and things on your own that even if people say that won't work, you should still try that.
Yeah.
You should still do that thing that people are telling you, well, you don't do it that way. Because I've often found that that's actually the thing that you should be doing in many cases.
No,
so
absolutely.
That'd be the big thing I would say, yeah.
Yeah, it's like you have to be the CEO of your own life, right? You need to, you're the CEO of your career. So yes, you should take all the input you can get, but you need to make the decision. And the decisions, like it's a decision. You need to make one. And it's easy to not. It's easy to not make a decision and to stay, to keep things easy, keep things safe, but you need to make a decision. And actually, it's funny because you said the conflicting advice. I couldn't agree more. I think Seth Godin has a book about like a meatball Sunday because people like meatballs and they like Sundays. And so a meatball Sunday should be good together.
That's such classic Seth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so everything you and I are talking about now, you could have gotten on Seth's blog for 10 years ago. But but basically this is it, right? Everything is really it's all about making those decisions for your own career.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, it's been really nice talking to you, Dan. I'm looking forward to being on your podcast in the near future as well. And thanks for joining me.
Yeah, definitely. Should I give people a quick shout out my website and Twitter and the podcast?
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead and say it, and then I'll put it in the notes as well.
Simply just because I enjoy people saying hello to me. So at Dan_Shure, S-H-U-R-E, at Dan_SHURE is my Twitter. I'm super responsive there. EvolvingSEO.com is the website. You can also find the podcast, EvolvingSEO.com/wire. It will redirect you to the right place, or just Experts on the Wire. Funny little story here at the very end. So I named my show Experts on the Wire because wire to me was like this symbol of digital communication. That's what I think marketing is, right? It's communication, but in the digital age. Mm-hmm. And then I later found out the building that I'm sitting in, where my office is, used to be a steel and wire manufacturing company.
Crazy.
So I was like, okay, I guess I named it the right thing. So story there at the end.
Well, that was a lot of fun. Dan and I are going to be talking again soon on his podcast, so be sure to look out for that one coming up as well. As a marketer, can you imagine driving 5 hours in a blizzard to gig for peanuts? That sounds pretty crazy, doesn't it? Well, that's the reality that musicians face every day. So if you're ever in a place with live music, I hope you give them a few dollars for their efforts. Maybe even give a little extra loud clapping when they finish. Thanks for the chat, Dan. Looking forward to joining your show soon as well. For show notes, visit Jeffalytics.com/Shore.